In this video, we will cover JavaScript arrays, ordered collection that can hold any type of data. If you're familiar with Python lists, JavaScript arrays work very similarly. So arrays in JavaScript are actually a special type of object. They're ordered collection that allow duplicate values and can hold mixed types. Ordered does not mean sorted, it just means that there's a notion of the first element, second element, third element. Let's take a look at an example. So notice that the type of returns object, not array. Also notice that we can mix numbers and a string in the same array, and also that duplicates are allowed. Let's look at how we can access and modify array elements. You can use bracket notation, which is similar to other programming languages, with an index to access or modify array elements. Arrays are zero index, meaning the first element is at index 0. Let's take a look at an example. So here I have an array with 4 elements, and I have a loop that goes over every element and basically adds the value of that element with a value that came before it. So let's do a console log and see the result. So 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, and 6 plus 4 is 10. This is a cumulative sum. Now what matters here is to make a note of how I access the array elements with the index, and then how I can also use the same strategy to update or modify an element. Let's talk about how you can add or remove elements from an array. So there are different ways to do this in JavaScript, but a very common way is to use push and pop operation. So push, you give it a value and it adds it to the end of the array. And when you call pop, it removes it from the end of the array. Let's take a look at an example of this. So notice that I start with an empty array and I use the indices to add elements. So this is just a bracket notation to add at any specific index. And this works even when I have not created or initialized the array with enough spaces. So this is a little different if you're coming from a language like Java or C++. You can in fact go and try to add something to any index and it'll just work. But once I did that, then the first element is going to be 10, the second element is going to be 11, and then if I do push, the third element is going to be 12. So let's take a look at how the array looks like. When I print it, the values are 10, 11, and 12. And when I pop it, the last element is removed, so I get 10 and 11 left in the array. Let's look a bit more at how we can create arrays. Now the examples that I've showed you, they use the array literal syntax, which is a pair of square brackets. You can also use the array constructor, which is similar to instantiating objects using classes. So here's an example of it. Both of these are doing the exact same thing. And it's far more common to use the array literal syntax, but you may see somebody write code like this as well. So in my example, I'm just creating an array and then I'm pushing multiple values to it at the same time. Now earlier I showed you this example where even though that I didn't say how big an array I have, I just use a pair of curly brackets to create it, then I managed to go and add values to it. Now in this example, you might have thought that I would have to first add the first element, then the second element, then the third element, but actually, and somewhat strangely, you can create a sparse arrays where you can throw in an element anywhere you want. So let me show you an example of this. Here is an example of it. So I've created an empty array, called it numbers, and I went in at index 99 and I added a value to it. So given that indices start at 0, 99 is the 100th element, and the value that I give it is a string 100. So here's how this is going to work now. If you print out the length of the array, it's going to tell you that it has 100 elements. And that's because I added something to index 99. So the way the length actually works is that it doesn't really look at how many actual values are in the array. It just looks at the last index and add ones to it. And so that's how the length becomes 100. And you might be wondering, all right, okay, so now what happens to all those positions before index 99? Well, all of those positions are going to come out as undefined. So if you try to access any position from 0 to 98, the value for all of them are going to be printed out as undefined. This is strange, admittedly, and I advise that you don't do things like this with an array. Just because something is possible in JavaScript doesn't mean that you have to work with it that way. But it's good that you see that these things happen in JavaScript. So let's take a look at destructuring arrays. We've seen this with objects. Let's see how it works with arrays. I'll give you an example on this. You can destruct an array to take out elements and put them in particular variables. So here I have an array that I called it numbers, and then notice that I say let, and I use a square bracket, and then I put two variable names, first and second. And then I say this, I use basically the assignment operator, and I give it the array, the variable numbers. So the way this line is going to be interpreted is that let's grab the first element of numbers and put it here in this variable. And let's take the second value and put it here in the second variable. And so if you go and print it, 10 and 20 are going to be the values for first and second. And again, it's not because I called them first and second, it's just the order that you define the variables. So in the second part of this example, I'm using A and B instead of first and second. And I'm also showing you that similar to objects, you can use the rest operator, so the 3 dots, and store all the other elements, the remaining values, in another array. So notice that A is 10, B is 20, and others is an array that contains 30 and 40. Some programming languages support multi-dimensional arrays. JavaScript does that too, but what that means is basically you're creating an array of arrays. So here's an example of it. You have an array where each element is itself another array, and JavaScript recognizes that you can basically use a syntax with like two square brackets. That the first one tells you which row you're looking at, and the second one tells you which column you're looking at. So magic square at index 1, it's row 1. That doesn't mean the first row because indices start at 0, so it actually means the second row, right? And then index 2 here means the third column. So the value 11 is what we're targeting. So look at the output, 11 gets printed, and then like index 00 would be the first row and the first column, and that's the value 16 being printed. All right, we covered array basics, creating arrays with literal syntax, accessing and modifying elements with bracket notation, using push and pop to add and remove elements, destructuring to extract values, and creating multidimensional arrays. Arrays have many more built-in methods that we're going to explore in a later lesson, but this is a good start for us.